Hey everybody, Plushie here, and with the highly anticipated Halloween event dropping on NA, I wanted to talk about one of the brand new servants debuting during this event, and of course, we are talking about the free welfare Cinderella Elizabeth that everybody is going to get, and I have been peddling how strong this servant is, and I feel like it's about time that I sort of explain my reasoning behind that. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video of Cinderella Elizabeth or rlly Liz. rlly Liz's first skill is a 3-time 3-turn invul, as well as a 3-turn 30% MP generation up, and it has a demerit of a 500 damage poison that she casts on herself that also lasts for 3 turns. This skill has a 5-turn cooldown. So right off the bat, this is absolutely insane as an invul skill, and I'm not saying that as an overstatement. This is better than most SSRs invul skills actually, because of how short the cooldown is and because the invul actually lasts for 3 hits. This means that in the worst case scenario, this is a 1-turn invul that has a 5-turn cooldown, because even if she gets focus fired, the enemy has 3 actions, it takes out all hits of the invul, it will still protect you for an entire turn guaranteed. And this is very powerful for obvious reasons. Even skills that just has a 1-turn invul with 5-turn cooldowns are relatively rare, and they are considered pretty premium survival skills. And obviously having this being able to last 3 turns and spread out across 3 hits is absolutely insane. If you're putting her in a team, you can almost use this whenever because of how high an uptime this has and just block off stray hits. And obviously if you want to play it ultra safe, you can still save this until an enemy MP. The secondary effect of the 30% MP generation up is less significant than some other servants because she does have a single target buster MP, so it doesn't really affect any form of refund, but she has pretty decent cards, and especially in solos where you can guarantee to use a mighty brave chain with her, she has really decent quick and arts cards. So with this boost in mind, you can help her loop her MP fairly easily, and you will see very soon why you really want to loop that MP very easily. And the 500 damage poison as a demerit for 3 turns is really tiny. You can easily once again remove it with just a cure command code you can grab from the friend point gacha, but also with any healing effect, it's very easy to out heal. I do think this is one of the strongest invul skills in the game, and I will stand by that. rlly Liz's second skill is a 3-turn 30% buster up, as well as a 3-turn 50% power mod against wild beast enemies, and finally it also has a demerit where it's a 10% defense down on herself for 3 turns as well, and the skill once again has a 5-turn cooldown. So this is not as impressive as her first skill in my opinion, but it is still a extremely solid skill. The 3-turn 30% buster up that only has a 5-turn cooldown gives her very high uptime for a really decently sized damage boost to boost her MP damage. Obviously you can also use her buster cards, and you know, it's just a good steroid because you can't realistically expect a 3-turn mana burst with a 5-turn cooldown on a welfare. That's just kind of overboard. So this is kind of the best you can get in my opinion. And the 50% anti wild beast power mod is pretty decent. Wild beast is pretty common amongst non-servant enemies, but admittedly it is quite rare on servants. However, a lot of non-servant bosses are actually considered wild beasts, so this is actually a pretty decent niche for rlly Liz to hit, especially for boss fights, and I do believe she is built for boss fights. And the demerit, while I think it's a little bit worse than the poison, it's not really that much worse. Once again, it only lasts for 3 turns. You can remove it with a command code, and it's only 10% defense down, and it is on a servant with a very powerful invul skill. So if you're once again using her in the team, she might not even take hits at all throughout many turns. So this might not even be a demerit at all. Finally, rlly Liz's third skill is a 30 star bomb as well as a 30 MP battery that has a demerit of a 1-turn self skill seal, and it only has a 4-turn cooldown. Let's talk about the positive effects of this skill first, I guess. 30 star bomb is really big, and she is a rider, so if you're using her in a team, using this skill almost guarantees her to crit with all of her cards this turn. Also 30 MP battery helps her loop her MP very rapidly with such a short cooldown once again, and I will get into why it's really good to loop her MP. Especially in challenge quests, and of course, you know, 30 MP batteries always help if you do want to use her to farm something or use her to kill a boss quickly by using her MP immediately. The skill seal is a real demerit compared to the previous two like kind of fake demerits, but it is still very easily dealt with by once again having a debuff removal command code and just not being dumb and using this skill before using her other two skills. And also there is a command code that has a anti-seal effect, as you can see here on screen, that prevents both MP seal and skill seal effects. So if you just use this command code and you have this status on yourself, and it does last for 2 turns whenever you attack with your card, and you can use this skill for free with absolutely no demerit. So what I think their design philosophy for her skills are is that, oh, you know, I use all of her skills and then her skills are sealed, so her actual cooldown is 665 because of the skill seal, so we make it 554. But once again, because of how easily dealt with this skill seal is, I think they definitely miscalculated if this was their intention. And again, we have another way to remove debuffs, as we'll get into very soon. So for Rider Liz's passives, she is one of the rare servants, modern servants, that have such a small collection of passives. In fact, she only has one. She has Riding EX that boosts her quick card by 12%. Now, this really isn't that significant in a team, in my opinion, but for solos, because you can get her deck very consistently, you can use her Mighty Chains, and her quick card is really decent if you consider this 12% boost. It generates a good bit of stars as well as MP. So for solos, I actually think this passive has quite a bit of impact just because of the Mighty Chain system. For NA right now, it might not feel as good, but after the Mighty Chain comes out, this is going to be really great. And finally, Rider Liz's MP is a single target 4-hit Buster MP that cleanses all debuffs on herself before the MP actually deals damage, and the overcharge effect is a 3-turn attack boost to all Fairy Tail trait allies, including herself, for 3 turns, that also triggers before the MP deals damage, and it scales from 20% all the way up to 40%. So this is a really powerful MP, especially against bosses. The full cleanse initially might seem like it's just there to cleanse the self-inflicted debuffs, which is still very useful, especially for the skill seal one if you don't actually get the corresponding command codes to deal with it, but it is obviously a lot more. Now, having a full cleanse is no longer that exclusive because of the existence of Castoria and because of how good she is in every boss fight. You can essentially bring her to everything, so you kind of have a universal team debuff cleanse anyways. However, having this on the DPS does allow the DPS to do it at sort of technically double the frequency, or if you want to use her for solos, or if you want to include her in the team that doesn't actually contain Castoria, suddenly this becomes a super valuable effect. Bosses that like to cripple your damage by giving you a bunch of offensive debuffs absolutely cannot affect Rider Liz at all, because she shrugs it all off, including the MP damage itself, just cannot get debuffed at all. Also, bosses that like to repeatedly spam a bunch of dot damage on you can also easily be dealt with Rider Liz, because every now and then she can just remove all of her debuffs. Her MP is rather spammable, even though it is a Buster MP. She has a very short cooldown 30 MP battery. Add on the fact that she's a Rider, she has decent face cards, and you know, she gets a huge star bomb alongside with the battery. She can easily crit to get her MP back. This is a really, you know, spammable MP, especially in solos as well, because of the Mighty Chain system. Bosses that really like to repeatedly give you a bunch of debuffs, such as Beast Kama or Cernunnos, where you receive a debuff whenever you attack them, or bosses that like to give you a bunch of debuffs by attacking you because they can apply a debuff whenever they attack you, such as Kamazots from Lost Belt 7, are all prime targets for Rider Liz to deal with. So just because of the debuff cleanse, she's already a wonderful boss killing machine. But her overcharge effect is also extremely powerful. I don't actually think any of the other Fairy Tail trait servants have like super crazy synergy with her, especially because when I want to build a team with Rider Liz, I would want to focus on her as the main damage dealer instead of having 2 different damage dealers. But you know, maybe in some farming you can have something cool work with, like Ruler Melusine or something. But even if this effect just reads 20% attack up to herself before damage for 3 turns whenever she MPs, it is already a really solid effect. Once again, because of how spammable this MP is, despite it being a Buster MP, she can actually ramp up her damage quite easily. Especially in solos with the Mighty Chains, she can actually have a really consistent string of damage boosts even without relying on her skills. And her skills also have really short cooldown anyway, so she's gonna have a very good uptime with different types of steroids. So her damage on the damage sheet might not actually seem that amazing. It is slightly lower than Rider Kintoki and is quite a bit lower than Ushi Wakamaru, but because she has this ramp up effect, and this ramp up effect does affect all of her other types of attacks. It's not just a buster buff, it's not just a MP buff, it's just straight up an attack buff that affects all her cards, her crits, and her MP, of course. It is a very strong effect on its own. So overall, Rider Liz, in my opinion, this MP is simple, but it's really effective against bosses, very easy to use, help you deal with a lot of annoying stuff that would trouble other DPSs greatly. So how do I feel about Rider Liz? Well, in terms of farming, unfortunately, she isn't anything too special. Now, I would say she meets the bare minimum of being a kind of usable single target farmer because she does have that 30 MP battery that pairs really well with the maxed out pen too. And her battery being 4-turn cooldown technically has some interesting utility. However, I will explain briefly why it really doesn't. The only advantage of having a 4-turn cooldown battery is essentially that you can run single Coin Light and still trigger it twice. However, because the skill seal is tied to her battery, you will be forced to use her MP on the first turn when using the battery at the same time if you don't want to rely on card RNG. So because of that restriction where you have to immediately use her MP to cleanse off the skill seal in order for that battery cooldown to remain 4 turns, this only really benefits single core looping with a single target servant that is Rider Liz, which this basically never happens, therefore I do not consider that an advantage. In general, she's just going to perform the same as every other single target damage dealer with 30 MP battery, who occasionally can do extra damage against Wild Beast trait enemies. Her very special Fairy Tale trait Servant buff also, in my opinion, doesn't really have any particularly great synergy. Obviously, there are some good farmers for 90++ in particular that are within that list, like Ruler Melusine or, both Kintokis, for example, but it's really not that notable. While Rider Liz's farming performance might be a little bit lackluster, her challenge quest performance is anything but. And I feel like people who have been following JP content pretty closely already know that very well. And most of the reasons why that is, we already talked about when discussing her skill set. Her first skill essentially being a better protection from arrows. She also has really decent face cards, a really decent Mighty Chains after that comes out. She has a short cooldown 30 MP battery with a very big Star Bomb, allowing her to sort of crit her way back into her MP after initially using it. Also has a pretty high uptime buster up comboed with a attack boost on her MP that also lasts 3 turns. She essentially never runs out of these kinds of attack boosts, and of course the full cleanse on her MP is also a huge selling point, allowing her to counter a lot of bosses that their main gimmick is to spam a bunch of debuffs on your team. Unfortunately, we have come to this inevitable point of the video where we have to bring up the comparison between her and Rider Kintoki, and to me the short answer between who's better is Rider Liz. In terms of fighting a boss, Rider Liz completely crushes Rider Kintoki. Rider Kintoki just has absolutely zero ways to deal with any of the boss gimmicks, especially considering modern bosses having a bunch of weird, disgusting gimmicks, in comparison to Rider Liz, who has, on top of the superb invul skill, a full cleanse on her MP, and also she has very good face cards as well. So overall, it's not even close. In my opinion, against a modern caster boss, Rider Ushi performs better than Rider Kintoki. However, this does lead to a better question in my opinion, which is, do you really need that much utility or survival on Rider Liz if you're fighting against a caster? And that answer is actually more often than not, no, you don't need that. She's overkill very often because, one, the invul isn't that valuable if you're already taking half damage from a caster boss, and two, if the boss also happens to not have any major debuff gimmicks, the full cleanse on her MP also barely does anything. Now, she's still going to do pretty well against a caster boss just because of the counter class and her ramp up MP, but in comparison to some other options, once again like Ushi, or even a notorious single target Rider Canis, who gets really disregarded because of the upcoming free Rider Liz. If you have her at a pretty decent MP level, as you can see here in the comparison. Now I do have to warn you that this comparison is only considering these servants raw damage with their own buffs, with no CE and no specific compositions. Because this is a boss fight comparison, there is no way I can list out every situation and every team, so I'm just going to use this. I apologize, but there you go. But anyways, back to my point, Rider Canis at like MP3 already out damages MP5 Rider Liz, and she also has way better crit damage with her MP ramp up effect. So a lot of the times if you're just fighting a caster, you might not really want to bring Rider Liz if you straight up have a more offensive option. In my opinion, Rider Liz truly rises above her other competition when you're facing against a really tough boss. Either the boss have really huge damage where you can't just shrug it off with class advantage, or the boss has a very annoying gimmick that prevents you from brute forcing through them. That is when Rider Liz truly becomes sometimes even better than an SSR. That's also the reason why I feel like Rider Liz should be treated more like a universal or neutral damage dealer and not be limited to fight against a caster boss. If you are not fighting against a caster boss, her first skill actually becomes even more valuable because now you're ignoring neutral or even super effective hits instead of already resisted half damage hits from a caster boss. Also, her ability to remove all debuffs from herself whenever she uses her MP actually might make her a better choice against debuff heavy bosses, even compared to servants that are straight up counterclass. For example, Cernunos, I feel like Rider Liz might handle Cernunos better than some foreigner class DPSs. Rider Liz also has just in general an extremely solid kit for her to be able to handle most classes, maybe not against assassins, but against anything else, I feel like she'd do just fine. Rider Liz is also an extremely self-sufficient damage dealer that doesn't require extra babysitting from their supports, that can take off a lot of pressure in very high pressure fights where you don't have to constantly try to protect them with like an invul effect, for example, and also this makes her a very good damage dealer for less developed accounts. And this is also why Rider Liz is such a great solo servant, because when you're soloing, a lot of times you're not just soloing against a singular class boss, or if you're just straight up fighting a gauntlet quest that has a mix of different class servants. And Rider Liz obviously excels in those situations because of all the reasons I mentioned, and also because she has a very decent quick and arts card, and she's a buster servant, so she can try to keep doing MPQA mighty chains or BQA mighty chains after that system is introduced to NA at least, and keep getting her MP back. And when that happens, basically she removes all of her debuffs every 2 turns and she keeps ramping up her damage with that MP, and as long as you give her a couple of heal command codes and keep her long-term sustainability sort of afloat, she can solo a lot of things despite not being an extra class servant. In conclusion, Rider Liz is an extremely potent single target boss killer that can rival the performance of her SSR peers. She has extremely good survivability with her first skill, a really potent full debuff cleanse effect on her MP, and in general just very short cooldowns on a very solid skill set. She also has very good face cards to help her loop her MP and generate more stars, and she's extremely easy to use, fits into any team, and can even hold her own very well as a solo servant. I urge all of you to try your best to at the very least get this servant to max MP level, max ascension, and all of her servant coins as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and this time I do not have to wish you a good luck for rolling for this servant, and instead I will tell you to don't slack off.